The cowboy's name was Eli Turner, though very few people ever used it. Out here, on the edge of the American desert, names didn't matter much. What mattered was whether you could endure silence, and Eli had learned to endure it better than most. His ranch sat miles away from the nearest town, a small wooden house surrounded by dry land and stubborn grass. Days passed with the steady rhythm of work, tending cattle, repairing fences, drawing water from the well. Nights were quieter, too quiet. The wind would move through the plains, and sometimes Eli felt like it was the only thing that remembered he was there. He had once imagined a different life. Years ago, he pictured a woman sitting at his table, children chasing one another outside, laughter filling the air where now only dust settled. But time had a way of wearing dreams down. One by one, the people he knew left, married, or were buried. Eli stayed. Alone felt safer than hopping for something that might never come. Loneliness became routine. He told himself he didn't need more than this. A man, a horse, and land to work. That was enough. Or at least, that was what he repeated every morning as he poured coffee into a chipped mug and stared out at the horizon. One late afternoon, while riding along an old trail near the hills, Eli noticed something unusual. His horse slowed, uneasy. Near the edge of the path, half hidden by rocks and brush, lay a figure that didn't belong to the land. A woman. She was Apache, her clothing torn and dust-covered, her dark hair tangled by wind and blood. She was unconscious, her breathing shallow. One leg was badly injured, twisted at an unnatural angle. Eli dismounted quickly, kneeling beside her. He checked for signs of life, his heart pounding harder than it had in years. She was alive, but barely. For a moment, Eli hesitated. Helping her would mean trouble. The territory was tense. Fear and misunderstanding lived on both sides of the land. Bringing her to his ranch could invite questions he didn't want to answer. But leaving her there meant death. Eli didn't argue with himself long. He lifted her carefully, settled her onto his horse, and turned back toward home. As the sun sank low and the sky burned red, Eli rode faster than he had in a long time. The weight in his arms felt heavier than just a body. It felt like responsibility. By the time he reached his cabin, night had fallen. Eli carried her inside, laid her near the fire, and began tending her wounds with steady hands. He spoke softly, though she could not hear him. He didn't know her name, her story, or what saving her might cost him. What he knew was this: the lonely life he had accepted so easily had just been interrupted. And something told him it would never return to the same quiet again. Eli didn't sleep that night. He sat near the fire, adding wood whenever the flames dipped too low, listening to the slow, uneven rhythm of the woman's breathing. Every so often she stirred, murmuring words he couldn't understand. Her fever worried him more than the wound. He had seen men survive broken bones and die from infection. Out here, nature decided quickly. At dawn, he stepped outside to draw fresh water. The sky was pale and wide, stretching endlessly in all directions. Normally, that sight calmed him. Today, it only reminded him how alone his cabin truly was, and how much rested on his choices. When he returned inside, her eyes were open. They were dark and steady, fixed on him with an alertness that startled him. She didn't panic. She didn't reach for anything. She simply watched, as if taking measure of the space, the fire, the man standing before her. "You're awake," Eli said softly, keeping his distance. "You're safe." She tried to move and winced sharply, gripping the blanket. Eli raised his hand slightly, palms open, a gesture of peace. "Your legs hurt. Badly. Don't try to stand." Her gaze never left him. Finally she spoke, her voice hoarse but controlled. "Where am I?" "My ranch," Eli answered. "I found you near the old trail. Storm was coming. You wouldn't have lasted the night." She absorbed that in silence. After a moment she nodded once. "Then you saved my life." Eli shifted uncomfortably. "I did what anyone should." Her lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. Not everyone does. He brought her water and set it close enough for her to reach on her own. She noticed that too. The way he never crossed the space between them without reason. The way he let her decide. "My name is Ayanna," she said after drinking, "of the Apache." "I'm Eli," he replied. "I won't keep you here longer than you need. Once you heal, you can go wherever you wish." That made her study him more closely. "You expect nothing?" she asked. Eli frowned. "I expect you to live." The days that followed were quiet but meaningful. Ayanna healed slowly. Eli set her leg carefully, changed bandages, cooked simple meals. They spoke little at first, but the silence between them was no longer empty. It was shared. Ayanna asked about the land. Eli spoke about the seasons, the cattle, the years he had spent alone. He didn't talk about why he had chosen that life. Some truths needed time. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the cabin glowed with warm light, Ayanna looked at him thoughtfully. "You live like a man who closed his future," she said. Eli stiffened. "Some futures aren't meant to be." She shook her head gently. "No, some futures are feared." Her words stayed with him long after she fell asleep. For the first time in years, Eli wondered if the loneliness he wore like armor was protecting him, or slowly hollowing him out. Outside, the desert wind carried on as always. Inside the cabin, silence was changing shape. As Ayanna's strength returned, the cabin felt less like a shelter and more like a shared space. She moved slowly, carefully, but with growing confidence. Eli noticed how she insisted on doing small things herself, pouring water, folding blankets, stepping outside with the help of a stick he carved for her. Independence mattered to her. Eli respected that. They spent more time talking now. Ayanna spoke of her people, of growing up among wide skis and stories passed through generations. She talked about how life was measured not by years, but by what you left behind. Eli listened, sometimes asking questions, often just absorbing her words like rain on dry ground. One evening, as the fire crackled softly, Ayanna sat quietly for a long time, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames. Eli sensed something coming, the way one senses a storm before the clouds appear. "Eli," she said finally, her voice calm but certain. He looked up. "Yes. I want to have at least 5 children." The words landed heavier than gunfire. Eli froze, unsure he had heard her correctly. She wasn't looking at him expectantly. She wasn't smiling or testing him. She spoke as if stating a simple truth about herself. No apology, no hesitation. He swallowed. That's a big life." He managed. "It is," she agreed, "and a full one." Eli stared into the fire, images flashing through his mind uninvited. Small boots by the door, laughter cutting through quiet mornings, a woman standing beside him, not behind him. Everything he had buried deep enough to survive alone. "I'm not that kind of man," he said quietly. Ayanna turned to him, studying his face. "What kind of man do you think you are?" "One who works, one who survives," Eli replied, "not one who builds families." She considered that. Survival is not the same as living. Eli felt the truth of its sting. He stood and paced a few steps, then stopped. "I've seen what happens when men fail their families," he said. "I've seen promises break. I won't be the reason children learn disappointment." Ayanna listened without interrupting. When he finished, she spoke gently. "Fear does not make you weak. Refusing to face it does." He looked at her then, really looked at her. She wasn't asking him to promise anything. She wasn't trying to bind him. She was revealing herself honestly and inviting him to do the same. "I won't force a future on you," she said, "but I won't hide mine either." That night, Eli lay awake long after the fire died down. His chest felt tight, his thoughts restless. He realized something that frightened him more than loneliness ever had. He wanted what she described. And wanting, it meant risking everything he had built to avoid pain. Outside, the desert remained wide and silent. Inside, Eli Turner's carefully guarded world had cracked open, just enough for hope to slip in. Morning came softly, as if the land itself didn't want to disturb what had shifted overnight. Eli rose early, stepping outside before the sun fully cleared the horizon. The air was cool, carrying the scent of dust and distant rain. Normally, this hour belonged to him alone. Today, it felt shared, even in silence. Yana watched him from the doorway, leaning lightly on her stick. She didn't follow, she didn't press. That restraint stayed with him more than any demand could have. Eli worked longer than usual that day. He repaired a fence that didn't truly need fixing, checked cattle already healthy, kept his hands busy to quiet his mind. But the words followed him everywhere. 5 children. Not the number itself, but what it represented. Continuity, noise, responsibility, a future that didn't end with him. By afternoon, Eli realized something uncomfortable. It wasn't the idea of children that frightened him most. It was the idea of being needed. When he returned to the cabin, Ayanna was seated near the table, sorting dried herbs. She looked up, meeting his eyes without expectation. "You're thinking too hard," she said gently. Eli let out a short breath. "I don't know how to think any other way." She smiled slightly. "That is because you have survived by thinking alone." He sat across from her, elbows resting on his knees. "I chose this life because it's predictable," he said. "No one depends on me. No one gets hurt if I fail." "And you," Yana asked quietly, "do you never hurt?" The question struck deeper than he expected. "I learned to live with it," Eli replied. She nodded. "That is not the same as healing." They sat in silence, the kind that carried weight but not tension. Then Yana spoke again. "In my people's way," she said, "children are not proof of success. They are proof of courage. You choose to continue even knowing loss is possible." Eli looked at her, eyes heavy. "I don't know if I'm brave enough." Yana reached for the table, steadying herself, and stood. She walked closer, not invading his space, just closing the distance enough to be real. "Bravery is not loud," she said. "It does not announce itself. Sometimes it looks like a man admitting he is afraid." Eli felt something loosen inside him. That night he dreamed for the first time in years, not of the past, but of possibilities. A long table, small hands. A woman's laughter carried on the wind. He woke before dawn, heart pounding, not from fear but from recognition. When he stepped outside, the sky was wide and clear. Yana joined him quietly. "Whatever you choose," she said, "choose it honestly." Eli nodded slowly. For the first time, he understood that loneliness had not been his destiny. It had been his shield. And shields, he was learning, were meant to be set down when the battle within finally ended. The next few days passed with a new kind of awareness between them. Nothing dramatic happened, no declarations, no sudden promises, and yet everything felt different. Eli noticed how naturally Ayanna fit into the rhythms of the ranch, not as someone filling a space but as someone creating one. She helped where she could, rested when she needed, and never once acted as if she owed him anything. That, more than anything, unsettled him. One afternoon, they sat outside beneath the shade of the old mesquite tree. Ayanna was braiding a length of cord, her fingers steady and patient. Eli watched her for a long moment before speaking. "You never asked me to agree with you," he said. Ayanna glanced up. "Agreement without choice has no meaning." Eli nodded. "Still, you didn't hide what you want." "I won't," she replied calmly. "A future built on silence collapses." The words struck home. Eli had built his entire life on silence, on avoiding conversations that might expose his fears. He realized then that loneliness hadn't been caused by lack of opportunity, but by avoidance. "I don't know how to promise you 5 children," he said honestly. Yana smiled softly. "I didn't ask for a promise. I told you who I am." They walked together toward the fence line. The land stretched endlessly before them, familiar and suddenly full of possibility. Eli stopped, resting his hands on the worn wood. "I spent years believing my life was already decided," he said, "that wanting more was foolish." "And now?" Yana asked. "And now," Eli continued, "I think I was wrong." He turned to her fully then. "I can't promise perfection. I can't promise that fear won't return, but I can promise this: I won't hide from the future anymore." Yana studied his face carefully, searching not for certainty, but for sincerity. "That is enough," she said. That evening they cooked together for the first time. The meal was simple, but laughter found its way into the cabin, surprising them both. The walls seemed to soften, as if the space itself approved of being shared. Later, as the fire burned low, Eli spoke again, quietly but firmly. "If you stay," he said, "it will be because we choose each other, not because of need, not because of rescue." Yana met his gaze. "That is the only way I would stay." The decision wasn't sealed with ceremony. It didn't need to be. It settled naturally, like dust after a long ride. That night, Eli slept deeply. For the first time in his adult life, the future did not feel like an enemy waiting to disappoint him. It felt like an open road, uncertain, demanding, and worth walking. And somewhere within that road, he could finally imagine a house not defined by silence, but by life. Change, Eli learned, never stayed hidden for long. It began with small signs. Riders passing near the ranch slowed more than usual. A distant neighbor stopped by under the excuse of borrowing tools, his eyes lingering too long on the cabin and the woman inside. Whispers traveled faster than horses in these lands. Yana noticed too. "You are not alone anymore," she said one evening. "The world reacts when that happens." Eli nodded. "I expected as much." What he hadn't expected was how little fear he felt. When two Apache riders appeared near the ridge one afternoon, Eli's hand moved instinctively to his rifle, but he did not raise it. Yana stepped forward instead, standing beside him, not behind. They spoke in her language, voices calm but firm. Eli couldn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. This was not confrontation. This was reckoning. After a long moment, the riders nodded and turned away. "They know I live," Yana said quietly. "They know where I chose to heal." Eli exhaled slowly, and they will watch," she replied, "to see if your actions match your heart." That night, Eli realized something profound. His choices no longer affected only himself. They shaped how others would treat her. Respect was no longer optional, it was essential. Days later, a storm rolled in hard and fast. Rain hammered the land, forcing Eli and Ayana to secure the animals together. Mud clung to their boots, wind tore at their clothes, but they moved in sync, anticipating each other without words. When it was over, they stood under the shelter, soaked and breathless, laughing like children. "This," Eli said, gesturing at the chaos behind them, "is not easy." Yana smiled. "Nothing worth keeping is." That night, as thunder rolled in the distance, Eli finally spoke the words he had been holding back. "I don't know how many children life will give us," he said, "but if it gives us 1 or 5, I won't run from it." Yana's expression softened, not with surprise but with acceptance. "I didn't need you to say it," she replied. "I needed you to live it." He reached for her hand, not as a claim but as a choice. She accepted. The storm passed by morning. The land looked different afterward, washed clean, reshaped, alive. Eli stood on the porch, watching sunlight touch the earth in new ways. For the first time, he understood that commitment wasn't about certainty. It was about standing still when everything inside you once told you to flee. And Eli Turner, the man who had built his life on solitude, was no longer standing alone. He was standing forward. The season began to change, and with it the land softened. Grass pushed through the soil in places Eli had long stopped expecting it. The mornings grew warmer, the nights less cruel. Change, Eli realized, didn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it arrived quietly, steady as breath. Yana grew stronger each day. Her legs still bore the memory of pain, but she moved with confidence now, walking the land as if greeting an old friend. She taught Eli small things, how to read subtle signs in the wind, how to know when rain was near without clouds, how to listen to the earth instead of trying to conquer it. In return, Eli taught her the rhythms of the ranch. Together, they reworked old routines into shared ones. What once felt like burden now felt purposeful. One afternoon, Ayanna stood near the edge of the property, gazing toward the distant hills. "My people will come," she said. Eli joined her, his posture calm. "To take you back." She shook her head. "To see what you have built." The thought didn't frighten him. When the Apache elders arrived days later, they came without weapons raised. Their presence was quiet, deliberate. Eli met them outside his home, offering water, offering shade. He did not speak their language, but respect needed no translation. Ayanna spoke for both of them. She spoke of rescue without ownership, of healing without debt, of a man who chose responsibility rather than fear. The elders listened. They watched Eli's eyes, his hands, his stillness. One elder stepped forward and studied Eli carefully. "This land does not own you," Ayanna translated. "You belong to it because you care for it." Eli nodded, humbled. When the elders left, they did not take Ayanna with them. That evening, Eli and Ayanna sat by the fire once more. The silence between them was familiar, but no longer empty. "I used to believe legacy was something men left behind," Eli said. "I was wrong." Ayanna looked at him questioningly. "It's something you live," he continued, "every day." She smiled, resting her hand over his. Later, as stars filled the sky, Eli imagined children running beneath them, learning stories from their mother, learning patience from their father. Not because he owed the world something, but because he wanted to share it. For the first time, the idea didn't scare him. It grounded him. As the fire died down, Ayanna spoke softly. "Whatever comes, we face it together." Eli nodded. "That's all I ever needed to know." The land stretched wide and open around them, but it no longer felt empty. It felt held. And in that stillness, Eli Turner finally understood what endures isn't the fences we build, but the lives we choose to grow within them. Time did not rush them. That was the first lesson Eli learned in his new life. The future he once feared didn't arrive all at once. It unfolded slowly, like the land itself, season by season, moment by moment. Ayanna stayed. Not because she was bound by gratitude or tradition, but because she chose to. That choice mattered to Eli more than any promise ever could. They built their life the same way they built trust, carefully. The cabin changed. A second room was added, then a wider table. The walls no longer echoed. They remembered laughter. Even the land responded. Crops grew stronger. The cattle thrived. Work felt lighter when shared. When the first child came, Eli was terrified. Not of the birth, but of the love. He had never held anything so small and so powerful at the same time. His hands shook as he cradled the child, realizing in one breath that every fear he had ever carried was suddenly worth facing. Ayanna watched him with quiet understanding. "See," she said softly, "your heart knew before you did." The children came not all at once and not without hardship. There were long nights, harsh winters, moments of doubt, but there was always honesty, always choice, always respect. 5 children did not arrive as a demand. They arrived as a life. Years passed. Riders no longer slowed when they neared the ranch. The whispers faded. What remained was reputation, a man who stood by his word and a woman who stood beside him. Eli aged, but he never returned to loneliness. One evening, many years later, he sat on the porch watching his children move across the land, some running, some working, some simply lying in the grass staring at the sky. Gianna sat next to him, her hair touched with silver, her presence as steady as ever. "I used to think silence meant peace," Eli said quietly. Gianna smiled, "And now?" "And now," he continued, "I know peace has a heartbeat." She rested her head against his shoulder. The land stretched wide before them just as it always had, but it no longer felt empty. It felt full of voices, of memory, of futures still unfolding. Eli Turner, the lonely cowboy who once believed his story had already ended, finally understood something simple and profound. Life doesn't ask you to be fearless. It asks you to stay. And he had stayed. With her. With their children. With the life he once thought he could never hold.